Okay.
You know what I like with it?
Wonderful. All righty. So we'd like to dedicate the next 3 classes to Purim. And what we'll do is it's essentially a 3-part series, but each piece stands on its own. And what I want to do tonight, and the series is titled "The Mystery, Magic, and Meaning of Purim." What I want to do tonight is lock down certain core concepts, core principles. So we'll sort of build the box, we'll build the stage, we'll create all around holiday of Purim, and then we'll be able to dive into it directly in the next couple of weeks. Now, if somebody is not around the next couple of weeks, what we're doing tonight still has great value because these are core concepts. Good? All right. So we're going to discuss 6 concepts. And as we always do, we're going to be sharing and developing together. The first,
the top part is join Zoom meeting.
okay. The first is the concept of machaneh. What does the term machaneh mean? Who's familiar with it and what does it mean? Jared, what do you say on it? Where's Elliot and Marielle?
I didn't hear you. What'd you say? The term what? Machaneh?
Concept of machaneh, what does it mean?
Machaneh, okay.
Yeah, it's the encampment, right? So the machaneh is the encampment that we're introduced to in the desert. And the encampment, though, is very telling and somewhat unique. And it's important for us to understand what a machaneh or encampment is, because that concept of machaneh is something that stays with us forever, until the time of Mashiach. So when we think of machaneh, hey Jeff, when we think of machaneh or encampment, we think of something structured, right? The encampment in the desert was structured. At the same time, the structure of the encampment was established in a somewhat unique way. How did it work? Each of the tribes had a certain position. Each of those positions was defined and labeled with their flag. The flag carried an emblem that was an expression of the beracha that Yaakov Avinu gave them to identify each of their uniqueness. And they stand each one in a specific proportion to the other, relation to the other. So now what do we have? We have this structured place where everybody gets together, everybody lives. But what we understand is that it's structured and each group must be where it is, but each group at the same time must remain absolutely identifiable. So there's a fluidity. Now, when the groups are together, that togetherness suggests that if they're fluid and they're different, now there's going to be some push and pull by design because we're all different. And the purpose of the encampment was not to make us all the same. It was to highlight the differences within this camp. So what we see is the structure from the time of Midbar till ultimately the time of Mashiach is a physical place within certain boundaries where the Jewish people would be all together, very much the same and very different, with a strong emphasis on highlighting the differences. Okay? And the purpose of highlighting the differences is obvious. Energy, push and pull, different opinions, development, growth. So the first permanent, fluid thing that we have to own is the concept of machaneh, of encampment. And keep it in mind, because when you talk about our community, you could use the term machaneh. When you talk about the land of Israel and all of the communities there, you could use the term encampment or machaneh. When you talk about the people of Babel, of Babylon, where the story of Esther and Mordechai Purim took place, you can talk about the concept of Machaneh there. So let's own that term, knowing that it's structure, it's solid, organized, it's determined, it's defined, and it's absolutely fluid because it's not about homogeneity, it's about the opposite. It's about the tribe of Reuven bumping into the tribe of Yehudah, defined differently, different aspirations, different wants, different dreams. It's about the Levi'im teaching all those different groups, everybody striving to get closer to God in a context, independently. Good. Then we have the next step of development of Mishkan. And again, we're setting the guideposts for the story of Purim, the experience of Purim. Then we have the second core element, which is established in the Mishkan at play in the story of Purim and going forward. And that's the concept of Mishkan. How do we define the concept of Mishkan? What do you want to say? Zik, B'chavod, concept of Mishkan.
Portable Beit HaMikdash.
Portable, and how did it work? What was the structure?
Well, I have no idea what the structure was. Walls, I have no idea.
Wall stuff.
Yes,
Lean,
like a sukkah,
stuff,
something, I don't know, it was fiberglass, if they had
Yeah, a
panels.
lot of stuff. But how did it work? Tell me how it functioned. Abe, how did it function, honey? How would you say it functioned?
I think it traveled with Bnei Yitzhak. So when they
Beautiful.
would settle there, it was able to transport with them.
Beautiful. So it was temporal. It moved with us, right? But in the day-to-day functioning of it, it was fascinating because it housed, as we understand it to the extent that we can, it housed the Shekhinah, the essence, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't stay in the Mishkan. It landed in the Mishkan, so to speak, and bounced into each and every person. So here HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to us and says, you're going to have this permanent encampment where the proximities are going to be established from in advance, but the flags are going to be flying high so that each tribe expresses itself and that never stops. And then we're going to go to another level. Once that encampment is established, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to plant the Mishkan right in the middle, so to speak. And once the Mishkan is planted, it's absolutely clear that it's not, I'm going to the Mishkan to embrace HaKadosh Baruch Hu. True. That's where his primary essence was, to the extent that we understand it. But that wasn't the story. The story was that once the Mishkan was established, each of us had a different closeness and proximity to Borei Olam, as we know, Ba'asuli Mikdash, B'Shachanti B'Tocham. Somehow, once the Mishkan is established, once the Mikdash is established, we enjoy a different level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence in us. What do we celebrate when the Mishkan and Mikdash is around? Just that. What do we mourn when the Mishkan and Mikdash is not around? The loss of that. That additional essence, indescribable, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in us. So, when is that a factor in our lives? Always. When does it play a part in Jewish history and development? Always. So now, header number one, as a backdrop for the story of Purim, the concept of machaneh, of encampment. Number two, the concept of Mishkan, which says, wait a second, there's going to be a special dispensation to the Jewish people where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to plant himself in the midst of us and thereby plant himself within us. And what does this allow us? It allows us an altogether different way of living. We can relate to God in a way that we can't otherwise fathom. We think about, for example, sacrifices today. Very difficult to relate to a sacrifice. How could we possibly relate to a sacrifice without the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash? We don't even have the frame of reference to understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu was approachable on that level, amplified by the sacrifice. So we're so far away from it. But in terms of Purim, we need to be reminded, 1 second, machaneh, encampment, community, essential, B, Mikdash, Mishkan, primary factor in the story of Purim. And now we have, I think, of the most interesting of concepts. What does the term moed mean? When we describe the term moed, what does that mean? Chacham, how would you describe it? Anybody? Moed? Huh? So we explain moed as follows. Moed is a meeting place in time established either by HaKadosh Baruch Hu or by our rabbis. Now, when we have a moed like Pesach, hi Geli, when we have a moed like Pesach, right? What do we tend to do and what should we be doing? What we tend to do when we have a moed is we commemorate what was. We look back and celebrate what happened. That's not what we want to be doing on a moed.
You mean Holomoed when you say that, right?
No, I mean a moed. I mean a holiday. Hi, El, hi, Ani. I mean a holiday. Good, Zeke. I mean a moed, a holiday. Pesach, Shavuot, Kippur, whatever it might be. Yeah? So what do we typically do on a holiday? We look back on what happened. This is what happened when the Jews were in the desert sitting in Sukkot. And when they brought the lulav and etrog and then shook it in Yerushalayim later on. That's what way we tend to think. But the primary purpose of a moed is not to look back. It's to look right now in terms of what's going on in my life, in my world, in my machaneh, in my community, in my encampment, and to draw out from the Chag everything it stands for, refresh it, and rebuild it and re-energize it in my life.
So it's not a reenactment. It's not a reenactment. It's a conduit to today.
It's not a reenactment. Beautiful. It's not a reenactment. It's not a commemoration, right? Therefore, what we say is as follows. We don't have Purim because Mordechai and Esther did what they did and saved the Jewish people from Ahashverosh. We have Purim because HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kivyachol stood back, so to speak, outside of the framework of time, looked at where the Jewish people were at point A, point B, and point C, and where they ultimately had to end up, saw their behavior, and inserted himself to manipulate circumstances that will ultimately demand of us to grow, to change with his involvement, and to establish a holiday as a result. So the Maccabees didn't win the war for us to have Hanukkah. We had to have Hanukkah, and therefore the Maccabees had to fight a war. And this is a huge paradigm shift. We don't celebrate Purim because we're celebrating Mordechai and Esther. We're certainly celebrating what they did. We celebrate Purim because of issues like Machaneh and Mishkan and all the other elements we're going to talk about had to be rekindled in the Jewish people each and every year forever and ever in order for us to ultimately become the people that we need to be. So I want you to look at Moed differently, whether it's biblical or rabbinic. We're going to deal later on with the difference specifically to Purim, But let's talk about the concept of Moed. Tells us Hakadosh Baruch Hu, imagine it this way for a minute, removes himself. He doesn't have to remove himself. He's removed from the mahalach of time, from the constructs of time. He sees the beginning and he sees the end, because from his perspective, there is no beginning and no end. It's just that way for us. But when he sees the mahalach within the constructs of time, he says, you know what? They need a little push over here. They need a little emergency over there. They need a little existential threat over there. These things are being primed because of the actions of the Jewish people, as we know. Purim was brought on by the actions of the Jewish people in that time, in that place. They had something coming to them. But within that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, looking at everything, looking at an eternal development of the Jewish people, will insert himself to a certain extent, manipulate to some extent, so that he crafts a holiday that will serve for us forever as an opportunity to grow. And our goal and our focus and our tafkid, each time there's a holiday, it's to begin studying the laws of that holiday and the background of it before, owning it, personalizing it, connecting our family to it, reminding ourselves of the core challenges and the growth areas that happen. We're going to talk about them in the context of Purim, and moving out of the holiday having been enriched and changed. We want to be able to look back on each Chag and say, Shehiyanu v'kiyamani. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me the opportunity to live, thank God, another holiday of Pesach, another holiday of Hanukkah, Tu B'Shvat, inshallah, coming up the holiday of Purim. I was able to say Shehiyanu in the beginning, saying, thank you, God, for giving me the ability to be alive for this Chag again this year. And then I want to be able to look back and say, I extracted, I grew, I'm better vis-a-vis each of those issues that this holiday represents. Good? I'm not commemorating, I'm not celebrating, I'm building.
But
No,
you're
you
commemorating.
could
You have to be commemorating the intervention that you're talking about, the divine intervention that happened with Esther and Mordechai. That's not happening with us. We are commemorating that.
Well, talk to me. So tell me, Zeke. Person A is commemorating, and person A is engaging. Tell me the difference. Tell me the difference.
Why can't you do both at the same time? Why can't you commemorate?
I don't have any problem with someone commemorating, as long as they're engaging.
Right.
So talk to me about engaging.
But I'm just having an issue with the fact that we're not commemorating, but we are. The intervention only happened then. Doesn't happen now.
So let's flesh it out a little bit, because it's very important. It's very important. Let's say I'm commemorating, right?
Uh-huh.
If I'm commemorating, and tell me, I'm going to exaggerate the point slightly. If I'm commemorating, I'm looking at what Ahasuerus did. I'm looking at Vashti's circumstances. I'm considering what the Jewish people did to lead them into that mess to begin with, because something didn't just happen, right? And then I'm looking at Mordechai and Esther, and I'm looking at all of them, and I'm studying about all of them. Great, that's a commemoration. Mm-hmm. But to engage means I look at the issues that the Jewish people at that time, in that generation, that machaneh, what they were engaged in. I reflect upon myself. I reflect upon my children. I reflect upon my community. Is there a practice that they were engaging in that we're expressing on some level? I'm saying, who is this Ahasuerus? Who Ahasuerus? We call him out. We shout about him. Who is he? What was he? What was failed in his leadership? What was failed in his persona? Now, I could look at him and read the story, or I can engage him. I can step into his life and his heart and his failures and his considerations. And then I grow from that experience. And of course, ala had kama v'kama, the same thing being the case with Mordechai and Esther. Mordechai HaYehudi, he was the only Jew. Mordechai Hanavi, we're going to talk a little bit about prophecy tonight. He was the only prophet. Esther was one of the 7 prophetesses of Jewish history in general that have been identified to us. How much do I have to know about her? Because she's me and I'm her. Remember, the camp is fluid. We each have our flag, but there's no walls. The camp is fluid. And to the extent that maybe year 1, I focus intensely on Mordechai. And maybe a year later, I really get into Esther's life. And you look at the transformation of Esther, and it's absolutely shocking. In my opinion, it's unprecedented in a story about Jewish leadership and Jewish heroism. Her role, the transformation of her, what she becomes, how does she become to a level where she decides that she's going to take a deoraita of the Haggadah and the holiday of Pesach, and she's going to just push it off for a handful of days. How does that happen in this meek person who is very quiet and very shadowy? How does it happen? Wait a second. Is there an Esther in each of us? There has to be. Otherwise, the story wouldn't have taken place this way. So you're absolutely right. There is a commemoration here, but the bigger challenge and opportunity is in the engagement. Let's do a bio on Esther this year. By the way, what was Vashti thinking? If she doesn't have an important message to each of us, her portion of the story would have been left out. Who cares that he wiped out his wife, who was the daughter of one of the greatest enemies, or the granddaughter of one of the greatest enemies of Jewish people in history? Who cares about her? I don't. She doesn't impact my life. Oh, wait a second. She does impact your life. She absolutely does. And that's why to engage is to learn about her as well.
Got it.
Okay with that?
Good.
Oh, good so far? Good. Okay. Let's touch a few other core concepts. So far, Joe, you with me? Jeanette, everybody good? Guys are good? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
What?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, okay. Okay, so far we have Machaneh, Mishkan, and we have Moed. And we've reminded ourselves of the definitions of each of these core concepts that set the groundwork for the holiday of Purim, and in fact, for many other holidays as well. What does the term Megillah mean? What is a Megillah, as opposed to a Sefer, for example? What is its purpose?
Scroll.
Scroll, beautiful, David. Now, what's the difference between, in our approach, between a scroll and a book? What's the fundamental difference? Jeanette, what do you say? Fundamental difference between a scroll and a book. How do we approach a scroll differently than a book?
Continuity?
You wrote, yeah.
What's that? Hi, Flora.
Hi,
How do
I'm
we-
sorry I'm late.
Great to see you. Happy to see you. How do we approach a scroll differently than a book? Come on.
You're
Fundament-
rolling
Huh?
it now? You're rolling it
True. We
versus
close it a certain
flipping.
way, beautiful. But how do we approach it differently in terms of
More
from
delicate
the
with
mood point of view? Elliot Chalmey, what do you say, honey?
More delicate. You're scared. Remember the clock. You don't want to read.
Beautiful. It's more delicate. Good, honey. How do we approach it? Excellent. How do we approach it in terms of learning from it? What's the difference? How do we learn differently from a Megillah fundamentally, inherently? How is it different for us?
You have to go from the beginning to the end. You can't skip. Right?
Excellent. You have to go from the beginning to the end. And what?
It's a story. It's a history book.
Beautiful, honey. Beautiful. And because it's a history book, what? Very good. Build on that point.
I
Because it's a
think
history-
because because it's a history book, we try to learn for our times what we can learn from that.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And this is a very, it sounds straightforward, but it's a very important point. Megillot are about Meser Chaim. They're not about learning halachot, although they may introduce the halacha or present something. They're not about learning halachot. They shouldn't be expounded upon that way. A Megillah is about learning Meser Chaim. It's about learning how to live. So that's key. Hey, Erwin, great to see you. That's
Hi,
key.
Rick. Sorry I'm late. I just wanted to catch you a little bit.
All
How
right,
you
great to
doing?
see you. Thank you for joining. Super, thank
My
you.
pleasure.
So
What-
that's the difference. When we have a Megillah, we need to understand that what are we looking for? What are we looking for from this? We're not looking for halachot. We're not looking to be mefalpel on an inyan, to split hairs, to understand the complex Talmudic-like issue. When we read a Megillah, and now you see how the pieces start to come together. When we read a Megillah, we're reading it for the benefit of us learning life lessons. So a Megillah, again, we don't go to shul in a couple of weeks and hear it, and it's something outside of us and separate from us, disconnected. We're listening to it with a very fine ear. We're reading it before. We're reviewing it afterwards. As we said earlier, this was all construed for me. The language of the Megillah, the absent terms in the Megillah. We know classically in this Megillah said the only one who references God in the whole Megillah is Haman's wife. The only one in the whole Megillah, right? We know that, yeah? On the other hand, we know in Megillat Ruth that there's an overt expressiveness of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Chazak Baruch, Baruch Tehiyu, all kinds of terminology that throws out over and over the frontalness of Hakadosh Baruch Hu in that word. Now here, and it really bubbles back to the first couple of points. The purpose of a Megillah is to teach me Meser Hayim. It's a story to teach me how to live my life. And I should be approaching a Megillah that way. And the Megillot are written the way they are. And Sefarim are written the way they are, books. And each has a different approach. So when we look at a Megillah, and when we say that, and we're going to talk about this more in depth in the next couple of weeks, when we say that we are on certain mitzvot deoraita, biblical commandments, in order to hear the Megillah in public, in a large crowd, these are very surprising things that our rabbis dictate, but they're there for a very important reason. We want to own the story, and we want to hear it b'hamon am, in a crowd where everyone is enthusiastic and everyone is committed and everyone is listening and everyone is taking away from it. Good. Okay. Let's do two more concepts. What does the term nivu'ah mean? Prophecy. What does that term mean?
Maybe what's in the future?
Telling us what's in the future. Yeah. What else? Nice. What would you say? What is prophecy to us? Now, we know that we're the only...
Something
It's
to
not.
us that we wouldn't know otherwise.
What's that?
When Hashem reveals something to us that we wouldn't know otherwise.
Okay, he reveals something to us. Now, what's our claim to fame in the world in terms of prophecy?
Well, we have Moshe who communicated with Hashem. I would think that's one of our claim to fame. And
Beautiful.
Nevuah is not necessarily something in the future, but it could be something in the present as well.
Excellent. It could be something in the present as well. Excellent. So let's frame the concept of Nevuah, because Nevuah has a lot to do with the story of Purim, and it has a lot to do with how we live. Now, we said a few weeks ago in a different conversation, we said that we presented something altogether different to the world. We presented the perspective based on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's direction that there's an absolute connectedness between the Kedusha, the separateness of God. And when you use the word Kadosh, it suggests an absolute separateness, certainly in reference to God. But we said, despite the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Kadosh, is absolutely separate, he's absolutely connected to us. That's what we said. He's involved in the world in general, and he's very, very focused on the Jewish people in particular. Now, what does Nevuah bring us? And it's a major factor in the story of Purim as well. Nevuah says the following. If I had to make a decision, right? Erwin, if you or I had to make a decision, right? What are we going to use to make that decision? What faculties are we going to use? What different elements are we going to use? What would you say?
In Jewish world or in general?
No, general.
I guess based on the facts and where you're going with it, no?
Beautiful. Yeah,
right?
and
the start. Then where you want to go with it, and then how to figure out how to get there.
Excellent. And what would you pull in? You'd pull in your life experiences, right?
Tuition.
Beautiful.
Right.
The life experiences, the knowledge you've amassed, right?
Talking to
What you've
people like Ricky.
Good. Right? Your life, right? You'd reach out to a few people whom you
Reach
trust.
out to them. Right. You gather
Right?
your thoughts.
Beautiful. Good. So generally speaking, when we want to make a decision, what do we have? What faculties do we have? We have some great faculties. We have our life experiences, our knowledge, the people we trust, right? Those are invaluable things, right? Invaluable. Now, what else is offered to us through HaKadosh Baruch Hu?
Intuition?
Beautiful, Jeanette, beautiful. What's another word for intuition? What's another word? I'm blowing it up a little bit. What's an exaggerated word for intuition?
English or Hebrew? What are you looking for?
Huh?
You're looking for English or Hebrew right now?
Either way, I'll take it. I'll take it in Greek if you want.
Inspiration.
Ruach HaKodesh? Like, what do you?
Ruach HaKodesh. What did you say, Flora?
Inspiration.
Inspiration. Beautiful. So what
Ricky, Ricky, I got to tell you one thing because it hit a note when I read last night. I'm reading a book about Peter Drucker, who was a management guru, whatever. He's famed, you probably know. So in it, he says that the left side and the right side when you're making decisions. So the left side is the thinking side, the figuring it out side, that left side, and the right side is the vision, the dream. It says, and when they both agree, then your decision is pretty simple. But he goes, but when they don't agree, you know what he says? He goes, that's when courage takes place.
Nice, good. I'm gonna build on that. I love that. I'm gonna build on that. Now the courage. What's our handle on the courage? What's our framework to the courage? What is it? Torah.
What that?
Elliot, your grandma said Torah, honey. You said Torah, right? It's Torah, but more specifically, what is it?
Faith.
Huh?
Faith in Hashem.
Beautiful. But Flora, when you said inspiration, what is the inspiration? Give me another word for inspiration. Okay. The word is nevuah.
Okay,
The word is prophecy. The word is ruach hakodesh. The word is intuition. Now, 1 second. Look what we're saying here. And this is the pivotal concept for Purim. So exciting. What we're saying is we have the left brain. We have the right brain. Absolutely right. And then we have this third wheel. We call it courage. We call it imagination. We call it intuition.
Imagination. I like that word.
Inspiration. We call it prophecy.
Foresight.
What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu promise the Jewish people in particular? He says, you all stood before me, your souls stood before me at Ma'amad HaSinai, at the foot of Mount Sinai, and I spoke to each of you on his own level. What? 1 second. Our rabbis say that the kolot that were established on Har Sinai was a once in a eternity phenomenon that was meant to teach an extremely essential concept, which is that prophecy in the classic sense is directed to prophets. True. But prophecy in the collective sense is directed to everybody. You want to call it courage? Good. You want to call it intuition? Good. You want to call it inspiration? Good. You want to call it Ruach HaKodesh? Good. You want to call it Hashem inserting himself into the mother or father's mind to name a child to fit a certain neshama? Good. But this is what we need to understand. That the notion of prophecy, the notion that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, coming from an area of boundless intellect, of limitless understanding, will continually input to each of us is possibly our greatest gift. Who is the greatest prophet? Moshe Rabbeinu. Who's a prophet? Everybody. Everybody. Now imagine what life would be if the only faculties we had were what we know, or what the people whom we know. It would be great, but how limited would it be? Because we can only talk to our practical day-to-day circumstances and experiences. Well, what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He says, wait a second. Nevuah, prophecy, is a huge part of the Jewish people forever. There are going to be times when prophecy is more pronounced, and there are going to be times when it's more discreet. But guess what? It never goes away. And who has it? Everybody raise their hand. Everybody has it. You get an intuitive thought. You get a creative idea. You get something completely out of step with your logical reasoning. It's this intuitive sense, it's this prophetic sense that's speaking to you. Now, in terms of Purim, prophecy is an essential concept, an absolutely essential concept that's reaffirmed to us on Purim. And we'll see as we go through the Megillah, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to shout the efficacy, the importance, the essentialness, the prevalence of prophecy, even at the time 7 years after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so far? So let me recap so far. Machaneh, encampment. Each tribe with its own flag, absolutely individualized, absolutely integrated. Never wanted to homogenize the Jewish people or anybody for that matter. We want each one to grow in their distinctions while they interact with each other. Democracy, capitalism, self-interest, that's Torah. The more I care about me, the more I will care about you. That's Machaneh. Second, Mishkan. Mishkan means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes this spectacular commitment, which is that I am going to place myself in your presence all the time. But guess what? We're creating a little building over there that's going to technically house me, so to speak. Can't house God, but whatever. Technically house me as a launch point to end up in the gut and the heart and the mind of each of you. So what does the Mishkan mean? Whether it's the time of the desert, whether it's the time of the Beit HaMikdash, or the absence of it, like at the time of Purim, it means there's an effort by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to insert himself, so to speak, in each of us. And when the Mishkan or the Mikdash is here, that effort is more pronounced and more prevalent. And when it's gone, that effort is much less felt, much less dramatic. Next, Moed. Moed is not a commemoration of something. It's a strategic plan. It's a key point in a process that HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulated events in Jewish history in order for us to have the opportunity to engage and to grow and to learn and to touch. Mordechai HaYehudi should be sitting in everybody's heart and everybody's head right now. We should be pining to figure out where he got his courage. We should be desperate to figure out how Esther Hamalka evolved under the hardest of circumstances to a spectacular lady. How did that happen? What were her challenges? What were her opportunities? How did she do it? That's what Moed is about. Engagement well beyond commemoration. Next, Megillah. So now when you wrap steps 1, 2, and 3 together into a Megillah, the point is obvious. I should be reading the Megillah as a meser, as a life directory, as a way for me to learn. I shouldn't be the same person. I said Shehianu in one form or another when the holiday started, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thank you for giving me life on this day, because I'm going to be better and more and greater as a result of being alive to experience it. That's a moed. Next, the Megillah, I'm sorry. Nevuah. Nevuah, as we said, is this remarkable structure that HaKadosh Baruch Hu benefits to us, where he says, you will never be limited by your local considerations. You will never be limited in your decision-making to your day-to-day and your life experiences, as valuable as they are. But Erwin, when you're making a decision about somebody's life and livelihood and direction, you can have the confidence to know, as we all do, that there's a greater element of insight that has plunked into our heads on a basic level. We're nowhere near the Nebuah of any of the prophets, and certainly a zillion miles from Moshe Rabbeinu, but we ain't cut off from it. We're in it. And we are never limited to make decisions based on simply, as great as it is, what we know, what we've learned, and what we've experienced. Nevuah is our forever. And how is it highlighted in the most outstanding terms? The fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to everybody individually at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, each one on his own level. What he could do, the more sophisticated person, the child, the thing, everybody on their level. It wasn't some prophet, so to speak, going off into the desert, call him Muhammad, call him whatever you want, and hearing something, so to speak, and bringing it back to the masses. We were all there. We all got it. It never ended. Sometimes it's more hidden, sometimes it's more overt.
Ricky, question. Is it, but when you say Nevuah, like a prophet, the prophet's playbook is based on Torah totally?
So it's very interesting. The prophet's playbook is based on a number of things. It's a great question. Prophet's playbook is based on a person's yeshuv da'at, how comfortable a person is in his own skin. Have I found my direction? Do I know who I am? Am I fighting out of a cardboard box, so to speak, to be somebody else? The prophet has to be a person who's found himself. He's in his own skin. He also has to be a person, or she, who can be expansive in their thinking because they learn to live on the money they have. It's very interesting. Our rabbis describe that the prophet has to be a person of means. Does this mean the prophet has to be wealthy? Prophets were not wealthy. What were they? They were people who were able to understand their lives and enjoy their lives based on what they had. So that pressure, that financial, most often self-imposed pressure, is a prophecy killer. They don't have that. Next, a prophet needs to be a happy person. How do we know that? Shmuel HaNavi, it says about him that when he set up the prophecy schools, the prophet development yeshivot, so to speak, he used to bring, from time to time, he used to bring the Nevi'im to play music outside. Why? Because music is uplifting. It's supernatural. It's above the physical. It's enriching. It makes you happy. So we want to touch on our little bit of prophecy. We need to chase these things. And they're so obvious. They make so much sense. Let me be the person who I really want to be. Let my career and my true self really be aligned. Not so easy, but it's fabulous. Let me learn to live with what I have and enjoy it. Whatever it is, financially, enjoy it. Let me do the things that lift my spirit, like engage in music. And of course, I should be learning and growing intellectually as often as I can. Final point. Haman comes from Esav, right? We know that. The enemy of the Jewish people until the end of time. Haman's great-grandpa was Amalek, the great-grandchild of Esav. Amalek doesn't hold by any of the things we talked about. He doesn't hold by unity with diversity. He doesn't hold with the possibility of HaKadosh Baruch Hu immersing himself in something and everyone. He doesn't hold with the concept of God being involved to manipulate world events, to create mu'adim that we will engage in and build each year. He certainly doesn't hold by Nevuah. So when you look at the fight that shaped up on Purim, it's the existential fight. It's Yaakov and Esav coming to battle again through their children. It defines everything about us. So when we're looking at Purim, we're looking about everything or nothing, in fact. It was an all or nothing campaign on each side, and we won. And what we'll do going forward in the next couple of weeks, with God's help, is understand the veracity of the campaign, the specific approaches of the attack, the challenges and opportunities and greatness of each of the individuals, the role of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and where this all takes us in terms of us engaging Purim and growing as a result of it and becoming more. That's the plan. Sounds good?
Great. Thanks, Ricky.
All right.
Hazak Baruch, Ricky.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Any thoughts, questions? Everybody good?
Beautiful.
Good.
All right,
Thank you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Great
Thank
to
Thank
see
you,
everybody.
Ricky.
Really.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Dad.
Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
All the
Thank
best.
you.
Good night. Thank you, Joy. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, all those I couldn't see. Myrna, thank you. Robin Chalme, thank you. Wow.
Thank
Good to
you.
see you.
Good night, Ricky.
Thank
Sam,
you.
thank you.
Ricky.
Oh,
Good night, Dad.
Oof.
Al, thank you. So happy you were on. Joe,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you,
you.
honey.
Dad, I'm
Love you.
Ricky.
sorry.
Bye. Thank you.